CFAS. CFAS.
CFAS. Okay.
We're live.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
CFAS.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to JD Watt's first series of Jaminars. We're so excited to have everyone with us here tonight, both those who are viewing and our guest presenters, which I'll introduce in a second. My name is Rachel Dolcine, and I'm the chair of JD Watt, which stands for Jamaica, Diaspora, Worldwide Organizations Task Force. And our task force is focused on providing information and resources for charities and nonprofits around the globe who are doing work in Jamaica. So tonight we launch our first series of workshops that we hope will bring information and resources to these nonprofits so they can do the work they need to do in Jamaica and do it well. So tonight I have two guest speakers with me. Tonight's topic is shipping items to Jamaica and getting them through customs. Our first speaker is going to be Ms. Latoya Harris from the National Education Trust, and she will be followed by Mr. Courtney Cephas from the Ministry of Health. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ms. Harris, and then I will turn the virtual mic over to her. So Ms. Harris assumed responsibilities as Director of Donor and Partnership Management in 2017 after serving as a public-private relationship manager at the National Education Trust, NET, since July 2011. Her role is to strategically manage and forge public and private sector relationships for the development of the education sector. She holds a Master of Science degree in Governance and Public Policy, Bachelor of Science degree in International Relations with honors from the University of the West Indies, and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of London. Latoya, Ms. Harris, is a 2005 recipient of the CIDA-funded ENACT Scholarship for Environment and Sustainable Development. Please help me welcome Ms. Harris.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me properly. Are you seeing my screen? Just making sure.
Yes.
All right. So pretty much the National Education Trust is a registered charitable organization in Jamaica, and our focus is really for development of education through philanthropic work and grant funding primarily. We also manage a portfolio of capital projects because we have a technical unit that deals with, repairs, construction. So we actually also manage some of the ministry's capital budget. So tonight, I'm going to start with a brief video that basically outlines what we call our 8 steps to donating. And then I'll just pin some of the key things that you should know when you're sending things down, or if you plan on donating to Jamaica, and getting through customs, because a lot of times persons will contact us and the primary issue is, how do we get these things through customs? I'm going to start with a video. Load in. So the first thing that we always advise persons to actually make contact with the entity that you wish to work with in Jamaica. And the first thing you need to know is that, especially when it comes to waivers, if you want to access waivers, you have to be a registered charitable organization in Jamaica. That means that if you're not registered there, you have to partner with an entity there that is registered. In terms of customs, when your items being donated or being shipped, once they're above US $5,000, you need a customs broker. And the value is not just a value of the goods that you have to factor in, or most times you have to also consider the cost of freight and insurance. So it's the entire shipment, that's the value of that will basically tell you whether or not you need a customs broker. The broker usually fills out all the paperwork that's required, and it makes your process a lot easier than you having to go and handle it, right? As of May 2020, Jamaica Customs also introduced the express clearance process, which is applicable to goods which are below 5,000 US dollars. And what that means is that you need an IMS4 simplified declaration form, and that's to be completed by an authorized clearing agent, such as a customs broker, or your shipping company, the agents that are in Jamaica that actually receive and process your goods. Sometimes they are actually clearing agents, so they can complete this IMS form for you. Estimated cost is somewhere between 4,000 to 9,000, and there is not a flat fee. It's actually depends on the value of the shipment and the nature of the commodities. So that's the simplified declaration. The only issue with the simplified declaration, really, because if you send things by ship and they arrive, basically it can be processed easy. The issue comes in if, I know sometimes persons from the diaspora will actually take items for donation along with them on flights. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because you would have to have made prior arrangements with a customs broker to meet you at the airport and for them to get that detention notice. Because what happens is that customs is going to detain the items, and the detention notice acts as a bill of lading or an arrival notice then. And that is what they'll use to process, and the broker will need that. So they'll meet you at the airport, they'll get that that detention notice from you, and they can complete the process. Of course, that's a service that you'd have to negotiate with a broker. And that would probably be an additional cost, because they're going to have to send somebody to the airport to actually meet you. So that one gets a little bit more technical, just for persons who are actually taking items with them through the airport. Some other key tips that was important. Now, persons always ask, why do we need receipts for goods, or why they need to put a value to things? It is customs uses the value of the items to basically calculate the duties, calculate the customs administrative fee that they may apply. So the value of the item, the actual value of the item, is important. We recognize, though, that there are times when items are secondhand, and we recognize that there are times when you've received an item and you're passing it on, you're donating it. In those instances, we ask that in completing the donation form, you give an estimated value, and the estimated value of the item is based upon the useful life of the item, and it has to be a realistic value. So you have an iPhone 8, for example, I'm just being random here, and you're gonna value it at $20. I don't know in what life and customs agent is going to let that fly. So you have to be very realistic in the estimates of value that you provide for items, because otherwise customs is going to go on, they're going to Google the item, and they're going to apply whatever cost they see or they have in their system that's, you know, to say this is what the true value is. So estimated values where they're applicable must be realistic. Other key tips, there are items such as paint that you need permits for, and permits must be applied for prior to the shipment leaving port. So you cannot ship, or you should not ship and then apply for a permit, because what's that going to do is attract a fine. So permits need to be applied for in advance. Permits usually take anywhere between 7 to 10 days, and usually, I know for us, we tend to rely on our broker to put in the paperwork, because, you know, as I said, brokers can be very handy. You have to pay for service, but they can be very handy, and they can actually apply for the permits for you, give that to you so that you have that. And customs will see that you actually applied for that permit prior to you shipping items. Items such as computers. Right now we have a drive in which we really need devices, tablets, laptops with students. You have to check with the relevant entities for items to see if there are specifications that they have. There's a reason they have specifications, you know. The specifications on tablets and that is so that the applications that the ministry recommends, you know, the students can actually access it. And different things, technology changes. We have had instances, for example, where somebody wants to send us some devices that a school or an entity decided that they're changing out and they no longer want. And basically we say, complete the spec sheet. Let us see what it is. When they completed the spec sheet, we checked it. It's not just that the school or the entity was getting rid of it, it's just that the manufacturer is no longer making that device too. What that means for us is that if a school requires spare parts or anything like that, they can't get it because it's just something that's not manufactured anymore. The other item I'd say that's key is how you ship and package items, right? So it's better to ship items, and this tip, I may add, came directly from customs, right? It's better to ship on pallets, containers, D-containers, crates, skids, drums, or barrels. Shipping large quantities in small packages, basically you'll attract a higher customs administrative fee. So how you package the things is important, right? So why you need, if it is that you want to know, go and why you need to get in contact with a registered charitable organization, and what most people ask for, waivers. So GCT, as general consumption tax, is waived for registered charitable organization. Special consumption tax is waived, stamp duty is waived, and import duties are waived. So all of that is waived once the items are properly consigned. And being properly consigned means the items have arrived in the country in the name of the entity that is a registered charitable organization. So it cannot be, for example, I've had persons send it to Latoya Harris. It cannot be Latoya Harris. I am just a contact person within the organization. The consignee must be National Education Trust in our instance, because the duty and everything is related to the charitable status of the organization, right? That's just the landscape in terms of waivers. What isn't waived is 50% of the customs administrative fee is waived and the other 50% isn't. So you still have to pay 50% of the customs administrative fee and the environmental levy. Environmental levy, really, a lot of times it's minute in terms of cost. So that's the good news on that. Usually the cost, the high figure is usually GCT, right? That's pretty much the main areas in terms of, you know, what are the things you need to consider in terms of waivers. How do you get waivers? As I said, you have to be working with a registered charitable organization. If you're sending items, you have to ensure that you check to make sure that these items conform to specifications or requirements that the entity may have. Items that you're sending, ensuring that you don't need additional permits. And if you need permits, that you actually apply for them in advance, because you can be fined one if you don't. How you package the items is important because that will determine your cost, and ensuring that you complete the paperwork. Paperwork is, I would say, the most critical part of sending things. Paperwork and time. Sending it prior to shipping is critical, because if you send something and then you want the waivers to be applied and you didn't do it properly, in terms of you didn't consign it properly, then you have to pay to have that amended, because, as I said, waivers can only be applied to registered charitable organizations, or if you have some special arrangement that the government gave you. And more than likely, based upon the framework that we're operating, it's the discretionary waivers are just not happening. And I think I covered most of the critical areas. Or contact, you know, I tell people all the time, people call and I try and explain. I said to them, you know, sometimes it's better you get the paperwork and go through it. If you have questions, you can let us know. Everything is on the website. It's net.org.jm, and our email, which we're very responsive to. The email is info@net.org.jm. And pretty much those are the key tips then I would give to anybody that wants to send things or ship to Jamaica. I'm sure Courtney will go into details in terms of health specific things, so I won't preempt him, but I'll end here.
All right, thank you, Ms. Harris. Are you gonna stay with us through the end?
Yes.
Okay. All right, wonderful. So I forgot to mention at the beginning that we will be taking questions. I see questions already coming in. Thank you so much for the questions. So that means you're engaged and this is important information. But we're gonna hold the questions until after Mr. Cephas goes, because we want to make sure that we get through the presentations and you get the information. And then we'll leave the remainder of the time for questions. So we are tracking the questions. You will get your questions answered, but we just want to get through the presentations, which are very short. And then both presenters will come back on the screen and we'll go through as many questions as we can before our time is up. So thank you all for your understanding with that, but do keep the questions coming. All right, thank you so much, Ms. Harris. And now we are going to move on to Mr. Cephas. From the Ministry of Health. And I'll introduce Mr. Cephas is a native of Kingston, Jamaica, and has more than 20 years of progressively, responsible experience in corporate finance and strategic planning, to include leading efforts that developed and implemented best-in-class enterprise financial systems to support the building of more efficient and effective financial organization with various companies in the US. Now that was a mouthful. Currently, Mr. Cephas serves in the public sector with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. In his capacity, he serves as the executive director for the ministry's nonprofit organization responsible for the philanthropic giving to the public health sector. Mr. Cephas holds a bachelor's of business administration and a master of business administration in finance from Howard University, and a Master of Science and Technology Management from George Mason University. Welcome, Mr. Cephas.
Thank you. I'm going to also share a screen. So let me know when I'm able to do it. And stop the sharing of the one
Yeah, I think Latoya has to stop share, and then you can share. You should be good to go now. Okay.
Okay, let me know when you are seeing that screen. Is the screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for having me this afternoon. Let me say this. Thank you, Latoya, for your presentation. All that was just presented, the good news on this is all that was just presented is absolutely the same thing for the Ministry of Health, donation to the health sector. Nothing changes in there. So the process is the same for the health sector as it is for education, as it is for really donating to Jamaica, period. Those are the things that you would go through. So Latoya did a presentation, was quite on point and in quite a bit of detail there on exactly what has to be done. So I'm not gonna hash that over. I'm gonna take it at a high level, but at the same time, much of what you will see I talk about will be pretty much the same thing that she spoke about, but coming from a different level, a higher level, and hopefully you get a good big picture there. Let me say this first and foremost. When it comes to donation to the health sector, the paradigm for that currently exists is that when a donor makes a donation, the donor assumes responsibility for what we call the origination side cost, meaning obviously the purchase, the procurement of the items being donated, but also the shipment and the shipment cost to get it to Jamaica. Also, the expectation is that the donor would pick up the landed side cost, the destination cost, the clearance through customs and all of that. It is not a best practice in donation to have a donor pick costs from the origination side and the landed side, the destination side. Best practice require that the donor picks up the cost from the origination side and the recipient or the beneficiary picks it up on the destination side. At this point in time, the framework that we are operating under is that we ask donor to pick up the full spectrum of costs end to end. And the reason for that at this point in time, it's a mandate from the government not to burden the coffers of central government. So in our donation policy and requirement, that is how it is stated. So what we usually do on the cost on the landed side is the beneficiary of the particular health facility, we would ask them, I would turn to them and let them know what it is, and if they accept it, they would pick that cost up. Other than that, we have been good and fortunate that donor tend to pick up cost on both sides when we go through the process. I just put that as a high level because it's very, very important. And there are times when we can see where it becomes problematic as I go through this. So let me start. This is a high level look at the donation process, and it covers exactly what Latoya just went through and spoke about, but it's at a high level. So the process starts with an offer. And what we encourage and what we usually do at the Ministry of Health is when a donor, and usually it starts with a donor sending us an email, or they might make a call to me or to anyone in my organization and say, hey, would like to make a donation. Based on that discussion, what we would say is, you know what, send us an email or a letter email indicating to us certain things. One, who the donor is. Two, a description of what is being donated. Three, the quantity, the value of the donation, and the designated beneficiary. Very important. What this establishes, it establishes a meeting of the mind between the donor and the recipient. A lot of times, the communication will become via email, very brief, or a phone call. And what we want to establish clearly is what the intent is and what is being donated, and that there's a clear meeting of the mind and sufficient information is provided early for certain things to be done, for you to move into a pre-evaluation than a more depth valuation. So who the donor is, the description of the item, the quantity, the value of the donation, and the designated beneficiary. What does designated beneficiary mean? You might be when you're donating stuff to the Ministry of Health, you might donate it to the Ministry of Health. And that's generally to the body, the Ministry of Health. And when that donation comes to the Ministry of Health, then the Ministry of Health will make a determination as to how to best allocate that across the health system, okay? If you just determine, if you, for example, says in your donation, you're donating this item to KPH or to Cornwall or to a health center, that's a designated donation. And that donation is specifically going to go to that institution that you have designated, that you desire for it to go. We will honor that. Part of our role, both in NET also and Ministry of Health, is to ensure that that requirement is met. The donor's requirement is met. It's a designated. I cannot take that and then put it to any other place that I want to put it to. We have to honor that which a donor. There are times when a donor might donate something to an institution, and we have a dialogue to say, you know what, that particular institution or facility is not necessarily in need of it. Would you consider putting it where it's needed? And with an agreement, you have a redesignation. So very important for the offer to be in a documented form where we can establish what I call a meeting of the minds. Very, very important. And we try to establish that when we engage with a donor. Now let's move to the next high level stage, evaluation. So once we have the donor, the offer, and we understand what is being donated, then there's an evaluation that's done to determine before we even get to acceptance. I'm going to say this. Let's be clear on this. Not everything that is donated, we're going to accept. That's it. Not because it's donated and it's free, we are very prudent in what we accept, and it must meet certain requirements, certain standards, and certain needs. We're not going to accept junk, period. That's the mantra. And the considerations for acceptance, we look at need. Something might be donated and really there is no need. If there is no need for it, we'd say that there's no need for it and not accept it. Very rare, but usually when donations are made to health, the need is quite strong and it's accepted. Utility. Something might be donated and it's not of utility to us. Let me give an example of what that is. Recently, I was in discussion with a donor seeking to help Jamaica, and we said, hey, you know what, we could do with some beds. And they were looking at various avenues of what kind of beds. So one of the beds, they said, hey, what about cots, military type cots? Very useful item to serve as beds during this time when our hospital's capacity is quite full. But evaluation was made to say, no, we wouldn't accept cots, not for the health sector. There's certain requirements and certain standard around that in terms of what we accept as bed to put in for the utility. It might be necessary during times of emergency and hardships, hurricanes and stuff like that, but not for the purposes right now. So that is not of utility to us. Age, how old the item is. Is it 5 years with their requirements in terms of the age of the item? If it's past its useful life or near max, if it's new, if it's old, those evaluation has to be made. Expiration date. There are items that maybe pharmaceuticals or other items that might be donated that has an expiration date. Generally, if the expiration date is less than 1 year, we're not going to accept it. And obviously, the next one, quality. The item has to be in a certain quality. If it's new, then it's new. If it's old, we have to make an assessment of quality. We usually ask for pictures and a number of things to try to ascertain that. And also the technology, how obsolete it is. And Latoya mentioned that we might have technology that's been donated and equipment, and if it's outdated, if it's not in fit with what we are, our cadre of assets and how we have upgraded, then it wouldn't be accepted. And then the other one, total cost of ownership, which also Latoya spoke about, repairs, maintenance, availability of spare parts. If the item, it can be a new item. If this particular item is very new, very useful, but we don't have the requirements to get the parts because it's new, sourcing that is very problematic. Locally, we have no suppliers of that part, or the maintenance cost on it is pretty high, then it's a consideration in terms of the acceptance. And technical specification, dimensions, power, the functionality, the model, all these things has to meet certain requirements. And as was mentioned, we evaluate the item if a permit is needed. So very early on, depending on what the item is that is being donated, we make some assessment of if it needs a permit, and we will help through the permit process. At the Ministry of Health, we literally help through the permit process. So if a permit is needed after the assessment, we drive that permit process and get the permit in place to do that. I have the resources that's on point to drive that permit process. Then the last step is acceptance. The beneficiary, the recipient, would indicate that yes, we accept the donation. Once that donation is accepted by a hospital, a health center, or the Ministry of Health, myself accepted on behalf of the institution, then we move to a closer engagement with you, the donor, on this. And we collaborate, communicate on the process and the protocol and the required documentation to effect an efficient and effective shipping process, the logistics process, and also the clearance process on that. What does the logistics process do? So documentation, as was alluded earlier, the invoice and the bill of lading must be documented properly. The consignee that's there in the case of the health sector, the Health for Life and Wellness Foundation, that must be named properly there. It also must be named properly on the invoice. Those two things must be in sync. Very, very important. And then the customs clearance process. Once it lands here in Jamaica, we facilitate at the Ministry of Health. We have a custom broker, and we have a customs officer, and we have brokers that works on our behalf, and we help to clear that process. So for most of our donations that come in, once everything is documented well and the process is nice and smooth, our customs officer and custom broker clear that process, the item through, and get it to the final destination, which is a hospital, health facility, or NHF for storage there. Let me go to this now. What have we seen to be the biggest challenge in donation? What causes the screams, the hair to pull out, and for us to get the bad name, so to speak? Documentation. If the documentation is incorrect, the consignee is incorrect, both on the bill of lading and or the invoice, that can be problematic. The foundation, our foundation name right now is the Health for Life and Wellness Foundation Limited. We send a communication to the donor to say, this is how the documentation on the invoice and on the bill of lading should be. Instruct the shipping side to make the preparations accordingly and have these names. As much as we do that and write it and send it and make it clear, we find a lot of mistakes there, and it's problematic. The Health for Life and Wellness Foundation, if you leave off the in front of it, if you leave off limited, that makes a difference, because our incorporation document has the name as it is. And one could say to customs, oh, that's not me, that's not our entity. So it's very, very important. As simple as it is, the name must be correct. And very often that can be problematic. So what we do is we go back, even though that's a lot of times, if we catch it before shipment, we can make the change. A lot of time, the mistake is made and the item is being shipped. And then we have to go through and request the change to be made. There's fees that the donor will now have to pay on the origination side to go back to the shipper to change this and all that. That takes time and it can hold up the process. On the logistics, so also import permit, as was said earlier, items cannot be shipped before getting an import permit. This is a common thing. Many times we instruct in bold, larger letters to say, do not ship the items until you are advised by the foundation to do so. And we have seen where shipment take place, a permit is not in place, and because the permit that is going to attract a fee. All right, and then we have to go through the challenge of trying to get the fees waived and stuff. It holds up the process. It can make it much longer there. What's the implication of these challenges? When it lengthens the process, is a shipment here is here in Jamaica and it cannot clear because permit is not there. It cannot clear because the consignee is incorrect. I cannot, the Ministry of Health cannot go and clear, the Health for Life and Wellness Foundation cannot go and clear something that is in the wrong name. They're not going to allow me to do it. And so it has to stay there until we amend the documents for the correct name, and so we can go and make the necessary clearance process. During that time, you have what's called demurrage costs. The item sitting on a ship before it's unloaded. After it's unloaded, it needs storage and it's sitting in storage. All these things are burden to the process and makes it take longer and more costly. And this cost that is being burdened, I said earlier, we don't pick up the costs on the landing side. We ask the donor to do that. And that cost increase and increase and increase. Donors don't want to pay it. All right. On the custom clearance side, the beneficiary or the donor not in acceptance of customs fees or the demurrage. And here again, when you have delays and these costs incur, it becomes a surprise to the donor. And the health facility here, Cornwall, for example, KPH, and I said, Courtney, we don't have any money to pick that up. We don't have any money to pick that up and stuff. And so what we do, and we have been doing, you know, by the grace of God, we do that. We have no control over customs. We have no control over the shipping agents. But because we work closely with them, there are times when my manager is so good and she reach out to them and they waive. And we have to wait until they waive. I can't push them. They waive. We have to wait until storage space is available to unload something from a ship and put it in storage. Those are the things that we are at mercy to do, but we do our best to do it. And then in the case, as I said, where there is the documentation is not correct, we can't clear it. My brokers can't do anything. So now you have no broker assigned to doing that. We have called the donor and said, hey, you need to get a broker to clear this because we can't do it. Those things are problematic. So went through the process at a very high level from offer acceptance to evaluation to acceptance, and then highlight some of the more problematic area. I think this is congruous to what was presented by Latoya, but I know I took it up a little high level. But the important thing I'll take away again, early preparation in doing this, early preparation, documentation, correct. Once documentation is correct, it aids the process. And communication and collaboration. Do not send something to Cornwall Regional Hospital because you have a friend there and you've been working with them, and then you have a problem and turn to the Ministry of Health and Wellness Foundation to do it because you weren't guided properly by the particular institution or entities or individuals you were working with. We see a lot of that too. So start with us early in that dialogue and that collaboration, and we can guide you. What we just said, about the Ministry of Health and Wellness Foundation and NET. We are two foundations that are there to facilitate the donation process. All right, that's what we're doing. Any other charitable organization in Jamaica that has standing in terms of they're a registered charitable organization, and that they can also do the same thing. You can turn to them to do the same thing. If you're working with another charity, once they have a registered status, they can perform the same function that we do. It's just that we are established to ensure in our entities, in our organization, in our sector, that you have an avenue that you know you can turn to make this happen. And we facilitate that. Okay? I think that's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Cephas. I'm going to bring back Ms. Harris as well, because there are some questions that viewers have sent in, and I have some questions I wrote down as well. This information has been very valuable as someone who has attempted to ship items to Jamaica, and some of the pulling out of the hair and the screaming and the not so nice words. Knowing this information ahead of time definitely would have reduced that tremendously. So thank you both so much for sharing. So we have some questions. I'm going to go through them quickly so we can get through as many as we can. The first question is for you, Ms. Harris. Or I guess either one of you can actually answer it. What happens if the goods to be shipped have been donated? And I'm assuming this is related to the cost. So the organization sending may not know the cost because the items are donated.
As I said, you have to give an estimated value of the cost. So you have to assess the items and provide an estimated value.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to be.
You indicate the items have been donated, and you provide as much information on those items. So we use a spreadsheet that we actually send to customs. On the spreadsheet, it gives you, can I share it so you can see?
Yes, sure.
Let me see if I have it open. So this is what it looks like pretty much for us. It's an Excel sheet, and we ask for it to come back to us in Excel, right? Because we calculate and do whatever in there. It has, as you can see, it has a description of the goods, it has quantity, and you can always, it has invoice date for you to put in invoice if you have it. If you don't have it, you can make a notation in a column along here, anywhere, just to say items donated. So it allows, it's an Excel sheet, so you can, insert columns and whatever, and insert text. Just say donated items, and then you put a value here. We ask that you declare the currency type, whether it's US, Canadian, British, Euro, you name it. So this is pretty much what we ask you to complete and send to us in Excel. And this is the information that's required. And when we were developing our process, we sat with customs, and we basically got from them what are the things that you need in order to process, our donations. And they agreed, meaning they approved this form. So when I send a letter to customs for items to be cleared using our particulars, this has to be attached because they're expecting it. And it's a detailed breakdown of the shipment. And we just ask, estimate your value, pretty much. Look at how old is this item. Use Google if you need to, use eBay, use Amazon, get an idea of the thing and put a realistic cost, because cost has to be realistic.
Okay.
So let me make a comment on that. So what was presented was the documentation and what's used pretty much for the internal reporting side of NET and communications to customs. From the donor standpoint, the practical document that is important to the process that matters is the invoice. So the invoice is going to, that invoice should be set out a certain way. And the invoice is going to list quantity, unit quantity. It's going to include the unit price, the description, what they call the extended cost, quantity times price, and then the total value of what's being shipped. If you have assorted items, each of those have to be listed. So if you're sending masks, if you're sending gowns, you have to say 5,000 masks, 10,000 gowns at what unit price and do that. Each item that's being shipped has to be uniquely listed there. That is the document that is important for the part of the shipping process and very important to customs when they receive that, they use that to make the assessment and stuff like that. Important on the assorted things. So if you put in a barrel, you can't shove in a barrel all these assorted things. And then on your invoice, have one says 5,000 masks, when inside there is 5,000 masks, 10,000 diapers, and all other things. That's a problem. And we see that also. Very, very important. So when we see that that's an invoice, it must correspond to what is inside there. All right? Very important. But what Latoya said was that's how the internal documentation to guide you as to what's needed. Very true.
All right, thank you both for clarifying that. The next question is, Ms. Harris, at the beginning of your presentation, you showed a video of the 8 steps and it went by very fast. So a viewer is asking, can you just quickly recap the 8 steps?
All right, so the 8 steps, I went through it verbally. The first thing is you make contact, and Courtney said the same thing. So you send an email with details, outline what exactly you want to give. The donation form, if you already downloaded it or you have it, and your offer. We call it an offer letter, offer email, whatever. Once we have that, and we give you the okay to ship the items. Because what we do is we check the items to make sure, okay, there's nothing on here that requires permit. Fine, go ahead, ship. All your paperwork is in it. We ask that once you have shipped, you provide us with a copy of the bill of lading. That's the document that the shipping company gives. Why it's important to give it to us immediately as you send it is because, one, it has the consignee information and details on it and tracking information. The consignee information, sometimes we will pick up from early that there's an error. And if we pick that up while the items are still en route, then we're able to, you can make changes immediately and there's no cost that will kick in. However, if you don't send us the bill of lading and when it gets to Jamaica, we realize, okay, there's an error on the shipping documents, then what that means is that somebody has to pay, right, to make that amendment in order for us to process it. Because if it's not consigned properly, we can't process it, right? So that's so paperwork is 1 and 2. You get us the paperwork, you get your approval to ship. Once you've shipped, you send us that information. Upon arrival in Jamaica, right, when the items get here, and the important thing for persons to know is that waivers aren't applied prior to items getting to Jamaica. So people will write us and say, can we get a waiver for this? It doesn't work like that. The waivers are applied. Waivers are, and we speak of waivers, this is very important, right? Because I have people saying, oh, but how come I have to pay X if there's a waiver? Waivers only apply to what the government is charging you. So the duties, right? It does not apply to whatever the shipping company charges you. It doesn't apply to what the local agents charge as their fees. It only applies to government revenue. That's what waivers are, right? It's important because, persons, they'll say, but I still had this big bill. Yeah, because you can't waive unless an entity has an agreement with you. I know that sometimes the shipping agents and those, if they will waive costs for different persons, if they know that it's been donated, they'll reduce their cost, but that's something you'd have to negotiate with them from upfront. The waivers we speak to are the waivers that government charges. Once the item gets here, we ask that the shipping company sends us arrival notice, which basically has details on it for customs. We'll prepare paperwork and we'll send it to the respective body. So if a school is going to be the one collecting the items, we send it to the school for them to go and clear the items. If the broker is going to do it, we send it to the broker. So whoever is clearing, we send them the paperwork to facilitate the clearance. And then pretty much they collect it. The important thing also is that once an offer is made for an item, the recipient, and it's as if, Courtney said it, recipient must say yes. And for example, if you're sending to schools, the school has to send us a letter to say that they're accepting this donation. And in accepting the donation, they also have to put in that letter to say the items are not for resale, because customs reserves the right to go and audit, right? And those items must be there. And if you have sold those items, you have to repay the government, because remember, the waiver is applied because it's a donation. It's not applied to for-profit ventures. So the school cannot sell the item, right? So once you're going to be selling, then no. So in that letter, the school has to clearly indicate that items are not for resale. And that's pretty much the step. Communicate, get your approval, follow the directions, consign the things properly, and you won't have a problem.
Wonderful. So one last question before we close out, because we are inching towards the finish here. And this question actually was a question I had on my list. So what is the process if the items are not going to, let's say, a school? They're to be distributed in the community or going to a community organization or a church? Is the process the same for that, or how does that work?
Is the community organization is registered, or the church is registered? Because some churches are actually registered. So the important thing is, are you sending to a registered charitable organization in Jamaica? If you're sending to a registered charitable organization in Jamaica, then they will have their internal process that they have to follow. But in general, the broad ambit of how the item is consigned, paperwork that's required, that's applicable to everybody. So if it's a community, I know we have done community initiatives, but the community initiatives have been tied in some way to the schools. So our remit, and we have worked with churches also, because churches will have a school, our remit is education. And we work through the education system. So through the schools and youth groups, children's homes, that's our remit. So it's just important that whatever organization you're working with, check their status. Ensure the charities organization has a certificate, ask them, can I see your certificate? See if it's valid, and it should be fine.
Let me add a little bit onto that. All applicable. So how I view it with the Ministry of Health, the foundation serves the philanthropic giving to the public health sector. So the public health sector. So an attempted donation to the ministry, the Health, Life and Wellness Foundation for you to send, and it's going to an entity or individuals outside of the public health sector, is outside of my remit. There are times when discretionary consideration will be given to a donation. For example, if it's mask, for example, that's coming, and that mask is going to be distributed, let's say, to the public, and we work with a church or a other entity to do that. There are public health concerns that's there that has to be considered in terms of that. But generally speaking, We have had individual or entities trying to say, oh, we want to make a donation and it's coming here. And you know what? It is going to a private facility that they might have or things that they're doing. It not supposed to happen. It's within, the remit is when serving the public health sector or public education in the case of NET.
Okay, so it sounds like for nonprofits in the diaspora, the best way to get items into Jamaica would be to partner with or collaborate with a registered charity in Jamaica, and work with that charity to then disseminate the supplies or whatever you're sending. Once you've, of course, followed these steps and the items are in Jamaica, the best option is to collaborate with a registered charity.
Right, and it's very important to have that discussion and be clear. So it might be a charitable, it might be a non-profit organization. It might be a established non-profit organization, but not a registered charity. Okay. So they establish themselves through company office as a charitable, as a non-profit organization, but then there's a second organization or entity within Jamaica, the Friendly Societies, that they have to register, the Department of Friendly Society, that they have to register as a charity.
Okay.
If they don't have that registration with the Department of Friendly Society, they will not get the sort of tax benefits that the charitable organization gets. So very important to establish that.
Yeah, that's why I said you ask them for that certificate from the department, and you should be.
And it must be current. Yeah. So they might have one and they expire. It must be current. If it's not current,
check the expiration.
Okay, so we have 1 minute left, but this question that just came in, I think, is really important. And so we're going to try to answer it really quickly because I know we have an 8 o'clock session as well. So the question reads, based on a meeting held with MOHW in 2019, person was advised that a publication of items requiring permit will be released. To date, that publication has not been released. Do you know when and if it will be released? And then the second part of that question, that's for you, Mr. Cephas. The second part of the question is for you, Ms. Harris, is the donation form that you showed, if that can be shared with the diaspora so nonprofits can have that to kind of complete, they can have it on hand to complete as they're planning their donation process.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question to me? What is the?
So a meeting held in 2019, there was supposed to be a publication of items that would require a permit would be released. So there'll be a publication release of these are the items that will require a permit. To date, that publication has not been released. The question is, do you know when that publication will be released?
Firstly, I'm not sure of the 2019. I was there 2019. I'm not sure of that discussion as to release of items that require permit, because really and truly, you have many items that can require permit. So the evaluation is done based on the item. So the list, if you were to give a list today, it is not going to be complete of anything. But one thing I can say, things like general things like pharmaceuticals, a car, certain types of equipment, especially those equipment that might have radioactive components to it. Some medical equipment will require a permit, but there are other things that we evaluate on as they come in and determine if they will require a permit. So the list, to give a list now, would not be all inclusive. Okay. It would not be all inclusive. I think the important thing on that is really and truly to have the engagement dialogue early. And once a donation is made, and we will then have that discussion, and we will make the evaluation as to if it is going to need a permit, and then we move to assist in that permitting process. We actually do that in getting the permits for the donor. So the important thing, rather than getting a list of a limited thing that can expand, I would say the early dialogue and clarity as to what's being donated in that offer letter, and then we can assist there.
Wonderful. And Ms. Harris, I'm assuming the link you sent was for the document you shared?
Yeah, the documents are there. So the guidelines are, that link has the guidelines for donating, which basically outlines a step-by-step. I think the guidelines in terms of specification for devices are there also, and the donation form.
Okay.
Our email is all, if you have any issues, just info@net.org.jm. We tend to be very responsive to email. Probably get a better response from an email than a telephone call. The more useful response, I should say.
Okay.
Because, anything I tell you on the phone, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to send the paperwork because that's what you need.
Got it. Okay, so what I'll do is for everyone who is viewing, we'll get this link that Ms. Harris shared to you, so you have it, as well as the contact information for both our amazing and wonderful speakers this evening who joined us, and the contact information for each office in case you have questions and as you begin to plan your donations. I know during this time of COVID, Diaspora is doing a lot to assist and help support both MOH and NET. And so the information you shared tonight is going to be very, very useful for us. And I am very grateful for your time. We definitely will have you guys back again later this year for another session, because you both could have a session on your own just for an hour, just talking through the process. But thank you so much for sharing your evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you. Thank you. Good
Thanks.
night. So viewers, don't go away. We actually have another workshop that will be starting shortly. And Professor Rosalie Hamilton will be joining us shortly for our next, there she goes, for our next segment. Thank you, Professor Hamilton, for your patience. We went a teeny weeny bit over, but there were quite some questions and the conversation was engaging. So of course, couldn't quite shut it off. So Miss Professor, Professor Rosalie Hamilton is joining us tonight, and she is going to talk about understanding Jamaica's charity culture and strategies for diaspora collaborations. I am really excited about this particular segment. I took a lot of notes the last segment, and I plan to take a lot of notes this segment. So let me introduce Professor Hamilton is the CEO of the Lasco Chin Foundation since June 2018. She was also vice president at the University of Technology, Jamaica, and was awarded a professorship in the Scotiabank Chair in Entrepreneurship and Development in 2008. Another mouthful. She established and led the MSME Alliance, a network of small business organizations, for 10 years, and also established the Law and Economics in 1998. She is currently a board director for Lasco Manufacturing Limited and National Integrity Action, a corruption watchdog organization. She's also chair of the newly created Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, a hub of philanthropy connections in the Caribbean region. Welcome, Professor Hamilton.
Thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share a PowerPoint here as I go through this very interesting topic. When you asked me to make this presentation, I had to start with a very interesting question. Is Jamaica considered among the world's most generous countries? What would you say, Rachel?
As in giving or receiving?
Most generous culture, charitable culture.
Is it considered?
What do you think?
You know what? I think so. I think
you would say we are among the most, not the least.
I think Jamaicans are. Oh boy, this is a hard one.
That's a hard one.
Watching.
Well, I thought to understand the culture, it's worth looking at what data is available to help us to answer this question. So I started there. I found that every year Gallup asks people across the world 3 questions that give some indication as their likelihood to give money, time, assistance, and so on to others, right? So these are the 3 questions. Last month, have you donated money to a charity, volunteer your time to an organization, helped a stranger or someone you didn't know who needed help? And they compile these responses and create a civic engagement index for each country. In 2019, Christian Aid Foundation used this data. They annually publish the World Giving Index. So they use the data, analyzed for 10 years, surveyed about 1.3 million people in 126 countries, and they provided some interesting trends. And it's important to say that this is not, rocket science, we're not precise, but it gives you an interesting perspective over time of how these questions are answered. So here we go. This is a top 10 on your left. Myanmar, right? Doing very well in terms of giving money. UK, Malta, Jamaica, unfortunately, not on that list. Good thing we're not on the other list, which is the list on your right, which is the list of countries that don't give money to charities so easily. So from the bottom, Georgia is at the bottom, Yemen, Greece, etc. Now, with respect to volunteering time, here we go. Again, Turkmenistan and Myanmar again on top, doing very well. You see USA as well, Liberia. And those who are not so willing to volunteer time, China at the bottom, Bulgaria, etc. Jamaica, nowhere to be seen. That's good or bad? Neither, right? Again, if we look at this ranking of how countries rank in helping a stranger, Liberia, #1 in the world, Sierra Leone, #2 in the world, USA #3. And what's interesting about this list is that of these 11 countries, actually, you have Malawi and New Zealand at the end here, they're mainly African countries. And that might give you a little hint, most of us coming from Africa, the philosophy of Ubuntu is important in helping a stranger and so on. That's interesting to note. And again, other countries that are not so willing to help strangers, Japan at the bottom. So when you look at the most generous countries overall, when you put these 3 numbers together, this is where we have, this is the tally we have, the top 10. The US is #1, Myanmar #2, New Zealand, and so on. So looking again across 10 years, unfortunately, Jamaica is not in the top 10. Are we in the top bottom? No, we're not there. We're not at the, at the bottom 10. China is, unfortunately, the least generous according to this data. Again, not perfect science, it's not precise, but it gives you a ballpark. And so where does Jamaica stand? What would you say now, Rachel?
I'm gonna put us, I'll say 60, number 60.
All right, well, we're somewhere in the middle. Our rank is 36. That puts us in the bottom of the top half because, they're about, the highest score is 60, 59, 60, right? And if you take, if you look at that number scale, it kind of puts us somewhere in the middle. So that's one view. Here's another view. Analysts have really looked at this matter of a charitable culture and have suggested that if we look at things like religion, work, strong families, skepticism about government and economic life, a lot of these things are associated with people's tendency to give. Education, age, if you're older, more mature, you'd give more educated, tend to give. And these are generalizations because, again, it's never true in every single circumstances. But for those of us listening who know Jamaica, we can judge whether, we have a lot of religious people. Does it mean that we're more charitable, et cetera, et cetera? Another interesting data is this idea that involvement in community activities, suggest that people would be more generous, right? But this is a lap-up study that was done over a 10-year period from about 2014 to 2006 to 2014, a little dated, but it gives you again an idea with respect to trends, and it suggests that really on all these trends, we're seeing a decline in involvement in community activities. So the interesting thing to note with these generalizations about a charitable culture is that it's not static. So we may have been much more generous in the past, but this kind of data suggests that things are changing and we may not be as generous as we are today. Now, let's get a little more granular. What are the sources of charitable funding in Jamaica? And I've listed a number of what I would consider to be the main sources of charitable funding. And we can start with grants and donations that are given by international donor agencies. And, you know, very important ones for us here in Jamaica include the EU delegation, USAID, DFID, IDB, this Caribbean Development Bank, CEDA. CEDA is the Canadian arm, DFID is the UK arm, USAID, of course, the US. IDB, of course, is a regional interdevelopment banking organization. Of course, Caribbean Development Bank, World Bank, UN agencies. All of these do a lot of lending, grant giving, not lending, grant giving in the region. Now, the government agencies also provide some grant funding, and big among them is the Culture, Health, Arts, Sports and Education Fund, CHASE, and also JSIF, Jamaica Social Investment Fund. And of course, there are a number of local charitable organizations. You heard in the previous section, if you were listening, that session noted that you can be a charitable organization registered under the Companies Act or in whatever registration form, but you're not registered under the Charity Act. So there's a Charity Act since 2014, I think, and you have to be registered there in order to get the benefits associated with being a registered charity. So there are corporate foundations like the Lasco Chin Foundation and many other foundations in Jamaica. There are other non-governmental organizations. A big organization, perhaps the biggest NGO, is the Food for the Poor. It's a good example. There are other informal NGOs, and these are like community-based organizations. And it's important to note them because some may be registered and are registered as charities, and some may not. They may not be registered at all, but they may have social legitimacy. So we should ignore them. But it's important to note that they are part of the landscape, and a lot of giving, especially of time, takes place in communities across Jamaica with respect to volunteerism, especially. Churches and religious groups, service organizations, service clubs like Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, etc. All of these also is part of the local charitable organizational landscape. And importantly, the private sector, especially as part of their corporate social responsibility spending, provide a lot of charitable help. And so that's also an important source of funding. Now, of course, the diaspora, as you all know, is a big part of this landscape, and you're not at the bottom because you're not important. That's just a list in no order. In terms of getting the scale of funding for all of these, it's very difficult, certainly when you try to add up everything here in terms of local charitable organization, very difficult, especially if we're adding in-kind contributions. And I know the diaspora provide a lot of in-kind in addition to the financial contributions that have been tracked. Now, coming to our core strategy now, what is, I would suggest, the core strategy to engage and collaborate in Jamaica with respect to donations and philanthropy? I would definitely say partnerships. Partnerships. Partner. That's the best way to support existing and new initiatives. And I thought we can talk about some general strategies of how to partner, and then I'll get into some specifics. Now, if we think about the grants from the international donor agencies, partnering in bidding for projects is a good idea, because many of them do have calls for proposals and a number of kind of bids that you can actually bid on. And therefore, you can send in a proposal, you could do it jointly with local partners, and that will help them get in the grant funding, and of course, your own organization benefiting from that joint proposal. With respect to government agencies, I would suggest that you partner in both funding and or executing the projects. Government do need help in certain areas where there's just not enough funds. And so partnering to you providing some funding also help, but also you could also help with the execution of the project with respect to technical assistance, professional expertise, etc. And the same is true, I would say, for local charitable organizations, that many of them, especially the NGOs and the community-based organization, want funding. And so they'd be more interested in the funding. But then there are other well-established organizations, foundations, etc., that really want more professional help and help in executing rather than even funding. And I would say with respect to private sector and the corporate social spending, that's very tricky because, of course, you know, the private sector would want much of that spending to be aligned with their brand, etc. However, many are open to funding, joint funding. They don't typically implement projects, and that's why I would suggest partnering with respect to the funding of some of these projects would perhaps provide a framework for partnership. Now, I thought that I would drill down as to what does a typical partnership for funds and to execute projects look like. And so I thought I'd talk about my own organization, the Lasco Chin Foundation, and our Diaspora collaboration from our inception. So we have two core programs that we do: our Sustainable Socioeconomic Intervention, or what we call a SSI, Schooling Support Program, and an SSI Entrepreneurship Program. We've also done, especially in the context of the COVID pandemic, we've done a relief care package program for needy families. And we've also done partnerships and collaborations around tackling some specific issues, crime and violence, and climate change. All of this can be found on our website, so you can check us out on the website, and you have a lot of that in detail. But I'll just mention a little about each. So with respect to our schooling support program, we did very initially start seeking partnerships with respect to basic scholarships for individuals. And here, our program seeks to provide a very comprehensive support to the most vulnerable youths, those most at risk of perpetuating poverty and being subject to being part of the criminal landscape in our country. So we use a risk rating instrument that goes into the community, tries to identify those that we see as most risky, and we provide a range of support. It includes professional support. And so psychological, psychosocial evaluations were done. And in fact, if you looked at the lower left-hand screen, this picture here is a picture of two of the psychologists that we collaborated with. They're part of that JD Tan organization, Dr. Grethel Bradford, and we also have Dr. Remind me of her name. If she hears this, she's going to freak out. I keep forgetting her name. My good friend, can you help me, Rachel? All right, so I'll come back. I'm going to remember and I'm going to redeem myself because this is so embarrassing. But both have helped tremendously on providing
Beverly Gordon?
social support. Sorry?
Beverly Gordon?
Beverly Gordon.
Oh, she's gonna get you. Yes.
Yes, I know she's gonna get me. I know Beverly, but Beverly is really a sweet person and is now leading one of the task forces. And you know, I always mess up her name. But Beverly, forgive me, my darling. Love you, love you, love you. They've both done a tremendous work in providing professional service. And that's important because as we roll out, sometimes it's not so much the money, but it's really the professional help. And they were able to work with a team, which is a team of our professionals here in Jamaica, and have done fabulous work. We've also provided care packages to these students, and many of them are here. These are parents who received care packages during the COVID period. And we found that we did collaborate with the Diaspora in providing a lot of that COVID relief care package. We also collaborated around providing a teen mom support. And that's important because sometimes we want to find individuals and they're very difficult to find. We in fact partnered with an organization called Youth Mentoring Youth or Youth Supporting Youth. And they provided support to this young teen mother and provide a range of other support. And we collaborated with them in doing this initiative. So that's the schooling program. Let me go quickly into our onshore program. Again, we provide funding. We've partnered with persons who provide funding, professional assistance in terms of mentorship and training. Here are some pictures with our colleague. This is our chairman, Lasses Chin, and he's seated here with the guest speaker that we had for our onshore program at the time, and also a colleague who is part of University of Miami, who provided helps with students at the University of Miami. So that's the nature of the collaboration, that we work with institutions as well, and even leverage students who are part of that. And these are just some pictures from the ceremony of the entrepreneurs. These were the winners who benefited. We also provided care packages, and those were just some images there. With respect to the COVID-19 relief care package, we had approximately 100,000 beneficiaries. That was only possible because of partnerships. We had 62 partners that we collaborated with, including partners in the Diaspora, the Alumni Association, UJAA, AJAA, individual organizations, JD-TAN, among others. And together we all did about 45,463 care packages to date. So very early, we did about 50,000. I think this was about June, July, early in the pandemic. You know, we got a lot of support initially. It's waned over time. The need, of course, is still great. This was a kind of webinar where we talked about what we tried to do with the partnerships. These were a lot of our partners who were on board with us at the time. And these are just some images of the school alumni relation that was taken place here, as well as a holiday gift box project, which Rachel, you know very well, you know a lot about. This was spearheaded by Rachel. And another good example of how partnership, and I know you can speak a lot about this, Rachel, can help with making an assessment whether it's best to ship stuff in. I know you wanted to ship those nice red boxes, or whether it can be procured locally even cheaper or more efficiently in terms of speed, etc. So those are judgments that partners can help with. And then with respect to the partnership around areas like crime and violence, that is such a big area here in Jamaica. We did an important partnership with JD-TAN, looking at two high-risk and high crime-prone communities, Mountain View and Salt Spring communities. Mountain View here in Kingston, St. Andrew, and Salt Spring in Montego Bay. And we did a planning session early in 2020 with the PIOJ, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, FHI 360 Corporate Foundations, community-based organization. All of us together kind of sat down, talked about how to partner in helping in these volatile communities, these communities that need a lot of help. And so it's a good example of what's possible when we really take some time and talk to each other so that we're very effective in tackling this very difficult problem. And then lastly, I want to mention a regional collaboration. Here we're partnering with individuals and organizations across the region. And this is a collaboration with the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. I'm chair of that alliance, and we did a lot of initial work with the JD Tan group that helped with the launch of this event. This was a launch platform. There's a picture here. We did a social media event early in March. Of course, there was COVID and a lot has waned since, but we're still up and running. We now have some tree planting ambassadors. Here are some tree planting ambassadors who are Jamaicans, and they're part of the Plant Enough Trees here in Jamaica. You know, we have to jazz it up, plant enough trees. So that's the initiative, and it's a great partnership where we're collaborating not only here in Jamaica, but across the region. And when we think about problems like climate change, no one single intervention is going to make a difference. We really have to effectively collaborate. So I'll wrap up then with some key steps in forging partnerships. 1, finding a partner. Now, you know, the best way to try to partner is to get a reference. You know, people who've partnered with organizations know exactly what this organization is about is a good way to start. Of course, sometimes you would meet organizations, individuals in a various engagements, events, networks, conferences, webinars, wherever. Or of course, you can do your own online search because many of the organizations, especially reputable organizations, have an online presence. So spend some time, find a partner. Once you've found a partner, you need to know that partner. And so due diligence is key. It's very important. Get references and, you know, make sure you talk to people who know people and so on, and make sure that the partner is credible. Determine whether you fit the vision, mission, and strategies that the partner is engaged in. A lot of that you can see online, because most organizations will talk about their mission, vision, what they're doing, their strategies, etc. So you can make that determination very early before you even start to engage. Now, once you've decided, yeah, this looks like a good fit, this is a partner that I think we should really engage, you set up a first meeting. You can learn a lot from a first meeting, right? Listen carefully, you know, take notes, ask questions, and begin to forge that relationship. Practice partnership. I like to think about it that way because I like the idea of piloting initiatives, you know, doing baby steps first. Let's try this and let's see how it works before you jump in with a major project and you find out halfway down the road that this partnership thing is not quite working. There's a lot to say about formal versus informal or written versus verbal engagement, but quickly I will just say that not because it's not written and it's just verbal, doesn't mean that it's not formal and has implication. It usually is better if it's written, and we tend to see that as more formal. But if you don't have it written, but it's well established and so on, then you can establish a formal relationship, but it's just less formal. And an unwritten verbal engagement tend to be seen as informal. MOUs versus agreements. An agreement, I like to think about a contract and agreement as something legally binding, and we could make that distinction. A lot of people are very hesitant to get into legally binding arrangements, and so I would strongly suggest we start with MOUs. And MOUs can have provisions in them that say, oh, this is not legally binding. This is just a engagement in good faith type of thing, all right? Make sure you jointly define what the partnership entails, the objects, the targets, etc. That's very important because we need to make sure that this is joint. It's not one-sided. And of course, once you start to execute the partnership, there is ongoing continuous engagements monitoring progress, and of course, evaluating as you go. Very important, so that we all know whether this partnership is working, we're achieving our objectives, and importantly, having the kind of impact that we want. Let me quickly talk about the advantage of partnerships, and then I'll wrap up. Some obvious ones: you can reduce spending, increase savings. You heard about tax waivers and waivers that you can get if your partner is a registered charity. That's very important. But just the scale of spending is going to be less if you have a partner who's going to pick up some of the cost, including in-kind costs. That will be a big advantage. You can avoid repetition and duplicity and wasteful expenditures. Sometimes we think that we're doing a great job, but guess what? Somebody just did it in the same community, targeting the same group, right? And of course, some persons may not say, oh, we've been there, done that already. You know, more is better. So, you know, you can avoid that. Reducing complexity. Sometimes the engagements can get complex. And so it's a lot of stress and headache and so on. And so you can avoid that because partners will pick up some part of this huge engagement, and it's going to be less stressful. Reduce vulnerability to criminality. I say that because, you know, sometimes members of the diaspora are targeted, unfortunately. There is evidence of that. And so we don't want your very presence alone without the kind of support of individuals and groups and organizations on the ground setting you up as a target. So that's important, I think, in terms of avoiding that landscape. It's very important to say that it's not in all cases that, you know, because you are from the diaspora, you're subject to criminality. That's generally not so, but there are cases, and one just has to be cautious there. Obviously, I think there'll be greater impact and greater enhancement of the impact. So it's, you know, especially if partners are well known and are credible. So it will enhance the credibility of what you're doing, and, you know, the knowledge, and more people know about it, etc. New and more beneficiaries, because sometimes you get into new places and new spaces with your partners. And even if you're working with your same beneficiaries, those beneficiaries can get more. So that's a good way to think about it. But there are also reciprocal benefits for your organization and new opportunities, because you learn more about organizations here in Jamaica and the things that we're doing. Some of us are doing fabulous work. And so you get an opportunity that you may not have had open because of this partnership. And very importantly, it's the enhancement of long-term sustainability. I feel very strongly about that because we have problems like crime and violence that is very complex, and there are no short-term solution. There's no one-off intervention that's going to fix it. It does require long-term sustainable interventions. And if we can support organizations on the ground that are doing that and help them with this long-term engagement, that's always better. So that's what I would suggest are advantages, and hopefully that gives you some idea as to how to engage. I end on this note, food for thought. The best collaborations create something bigger than the sum of what each individual or organization can create on your own. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamilton. Let me tell you, this presentation was amazing. And it really covered a lot of the items that I was hoping you would to share with the organizations throughout the diaspora. And I will tell you, having partnered with Lasco Chin Foundation to do the Holiday Gift Project and to give away the food, I don't think that our organization will ever ship food to Jamaica again. Because I think, you know, what you mentioned about when you collaborate with an organization that's in Jamaica, you can troubleshoot. When we looked at the cost to acquire barrels, pay for them to be picked up, pay for them to be shipped, get them off the wharf, that was significantly cut just by partnering with the foundation, Lasco Chin Foundation, to acquire the items, get them on a bus to the folks who needed them. The cost was so much less.
Yeah.
So I know for us, and when the board kind of reviewed just how smooth it went and the logistics of it and how much less work, like all we had to do was raise the money versus raising the money, finding the items, sending the items. Let me tell you, I don't think we will ever, ever ship food items when we want to distribute it on a large scale to Jamaica. I think the money was definitely, you could stretch the dollars. And what you talked about, wasteful spending, not to say that paying for shipping costs is wasteful spending, but that several $100s that we paid to ship could feed more people. Just kind of how we looked at it. So that you definitely dropped some gems. And
of course, some of the wasteful spending would be, for example, the repetition. So it's sometimes in the execution, we're repeating things, and we find that sometimes it's not necessary.
Right.
Again, because there are lots of these activities being done on the ground, and so you avoid that.
So one of the questions that came in was, how do we collaborate with Lasco Chin Foundation?
Go to our website. Go to our website. There are lots of ways to collaborate, and lots of programs and initiatives. I only mentioned some of them. We also do work in the environment as well as a foundation, in addition to the regional engagement. And so, there are a number of things we're doing, and there are many ways to collaborate. With respect to some of the targeted programs, like the Schooling Support Program, it's a very elaborate program, not enough time to delve into that. But we do a number of things. We provide nutritional support to the students. We provide extracurricular activities, and so on, and help parental support, very important. And we have received diasporan support, again, with respect to parental support, sessions with the parents, helping them think through. And I do want to thank JD Tan in respect to the kinds of support that you've provided with respect to some of the technical engagements and the professional engagements.
And I want to encourage my fellow do-gooders who are, committed to really helping Jamaica to be an amazing country. We've been grounded by COVID. So this is probably the second year the organization that I started, we haven't been able to travel. And so what happens to your mission, instead of it coming to a standstill when you partner, our mission is still going because we've made it a point to ensure that we are partnering with organizations, charities in Jamaica the work still continues. Just because there's COVID doesn't stop the work on the Jamaica end. We may be grounded, but the work still continues. So what these partnerships also do, it allows your mission to keep going. You're not grounded, you're not stopped. You really can still go full steam ahead and do the work that needs to be done, just in a different way. You have to pivot, but the work is still being done, and you can still assess and manage that work with the right partner. You're right about selecting the right partner and making sure that your missions are aligned and that there's capacity. That organization in Jamaica has a capacity to fulfill the obligations or whatever the agreement is.
Of course.
Another question just came in. If a person does not have funds to contribute and would like to volunteer their time and other resources, how can they go about doing that?
Again, in our case, you can, let us know on the website. We do have a place on the website that we encourage volunteers, so you can register to become a volunteer with our organization. A lot of organizations also have that, where you can volunteer on the website. The organization will contact you, and then we provide a framework in which the volunteer work can take place. Let me say that sometimes it's not as simple as, here I am, slot you in. Because I can say from our own organizational perspective, especially during the COVID period, it was very difficult just trying to manage, our own in-house staff and personnel, trying to get packages done, etc., being very careful with all the COVID protocols, etc. It was really difficult. So sometimes you may not be engaged right away, but please be patient, because we're still going through some tough times, and therefore fitting, because remember, once you volunteer in an organization, there needs to be at least a briefing of what the organization is actually doing, your role, responsibility, etc. And just the time sometimes to do that may be challenging, especially depending on the area. or it could be a very sensitive area, and we have to manage how we bring new people in those areas and those communities.
Okay, I have another question. The questions are coming for you, Professor. Is there a way to expand LCF offerings to other areas of need outside of what LCF currently offers?
That's a very good question, because we are, of course, guided, like most organizations, by our objects as part of our registration process, and we can't go out of that. That's our mandate. We have a board, and we can't go beyond what the board wants. However, having said that, we're broadly speaking in the area of crime and violence. And so while our intervention is very specifically targeted to a community, because we want to examine the idea of targeting these most vulnerable youths and preventing them from joining the ranks of criminals in the future. That's kind of our thesis. And we feel that if we can make it work in a community, and we can show some lessons learned and some successes, we can replicate it. Now, we would love partners who would come and help us to go beyond that. Although that's what we're doing, go beyond that, may want to go in a community and we could collaborate, etc. So there is room to go beyond a specific mandate or a specific focus, as long as it's within the legal defined terms of reference. That's part of the mission and vision and goal of the organization. So yes, in principle, again, within the bounds of the mandates and dictates of our board, which ultimately makes the final decision, and our legal limits.
Okay, hopefully that answers that question. So we got a few minutes left. So I want to go back to the beginning of your presentation, because I thought that information was so very interesting, not just for Jamaica, but as I look at the other countries, one of the things that I have always found here in the US in engaging donors, because we live in a very diverse culture. And so we have folks from all over the world that I would ask to donate funds or to donate time. And as I'm looking at that list, a light bulb went off, like, okay, so that's why it's so difficult. So that's why I didn't get a response. So that's why I couldn't engage that particular community. So I think the information you shared is really, really important for us in the diaspora who's doing work. And I'm hoping that the folks who are watching, who have organizations that are serving Jamaica, didn't miss the importance of that information, because what it helps to set is expectations. So that as your board is working to build out what you offer to Jamaica and how you engage, that's very important information to know. It's very, very, very important information to know, because it helps us to set the goals and expectations. So for example, if I know that a country I'm going into, probably community engagement is not as high, on my end, I might want to travel with more volunteers, right? That can help to do the work. If I know that a particular country or community I'm going to culture-wise, they're not very versed on financial giving and what that means and why it's important to give back to the community, I'm gonna need to do some work around that first before I launch a program where there needs to be some buy-in or some skin in the game, as I call it, from the community, because culturally, that's really not something that's a norm. So that information you shared, and I was trying to screenshot, but I don't know how to do it on my laptop, screenshot those screens, because I was just like, that information was so very valuable, and I'm hoping that others really didn't miss that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It gives you, these again, it's not precise, and it's not, because, right, you know, for every country, there are generous people, and there are people who are mean, right? but you know, the cultural tendencies matter.
Yes. And
I think it's not unfair to say, given what we know about Jamaica, that we somewhere land in the middle, you know? That, you know, in some communities, some places, you know, we're very generous and so on, and another, and we know them, we know limitations. So we're there. And I would err on the side of the more giving than the less giving. And I think, we end, even if it's in the bottom of this half that's of the world that's more giving, at least we're on that side. And I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because I'm thinking about the steps I've taken here to engage specifically the Jamaican community for the work I do in Jamaica. And it's been on either end of the spectrum. I've had folks who were very engaged and like, yes, it's my country, I'm definitely gonna give. And I have others who are very apprehensive, because what is the money going to be used for? You have to give them almost a whole plan as to what the money's going to be used for. Because, people take money, they don't do what they're supposed to do. And then what is the Jamaican government doing? So you have all these definitely very, very polarizing views from my work in the community here, at least where I live, to try to engage the Jamaican community. It definitely has been. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm on board what I need to do. And, excuse me, I work hard for my money. What is this for again? Type of thing. So, it's for a country that's hospitable. Everyone wants to go to Jamaica because they talk about how hospitality. And I don't think that we are very hospitable people, very welcoming, very warm. So matching that with philanthropy and charity is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely an interest. Is a very interesting perspective on that.
And there are lots of, there are lots of studies that look at this matter. And so, it's hard to quantify very precisely, where a culture lands, because, there's so many variables. But that's why I suggested that we could we know our people, we know how religious they are, we know, the skepticism of government. For example, that point about government is very important.
Yeah.
Believe that government must do it
right,
then you're not going to give much. You're going to say, listen, government must fix those problems. You're not going to do much. And there are lots of Jamaicans who feel that way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And honestly, in any country, as rich as the US is known to be, in any country, the government alone cannot solve the social problems or meet needs. And so historically, it's always been churches, small community organization, or communities who come together to kind of meet the needs of their own community. So I think that's one of the conversations that definitely, that I think it's important for the organizations who serve Jamaica to start having. How do we start to have these conversations with the communities we serve in Jamaica? Because it's possible there was a downturn. So obviously at some point, Jamaica was definitely more charitable than it was now. And so I think that I know for me, getting that information, part of my commitment and conversation with my board is going to be, in the community that we have consistently served for the last 8 years, how do we start this conversation around, you've received, now how do you give back? Yeah. Right? Because you can't just receive. We've been given. How do you kind of pay it forward? And really working that pay it forward, whether it's your time, because you may not have money, but it may be your time or your skill. How do you kind of pay it forward now that you've received? So I think that was my favorite part of the presentation. I mean, it was all good, but that beginning part was really.
Yeah. And I say, and it's a good way to start. I mean, when we get down to the details, there's a lot there. I think in this whole space of giving and giving back and giving forward and so on, the concept of Ubuntu is so important, that we have to see that we are brothers keepers, we are interconnected, and we need to find a way to help. It's not simply about what the government can do or has been doing or want to do, because no government can fix all the social and economic problems in any society. No. So we all have a responsibility and a role to play. And I always say that includes pressuring our government and making sure that we're properly represented and the government does their part.
Yes.
Right? We need to also do our part.
All right. Well, thank you, Professor Hamilton, for being with us tonight. We are at the end of our first workshop series. This was
Great.
exciting. I'm excited to continue this series. So for those who are watching, our next segment will be on March 18th at 7 p.m. And we are going to be talking with some nonprofit leaders, women leaders, about their journey. And then on April 1st, we'll have another nonprofit workshop series. And we're going to be talking about, on April 1st, we're going to be talking about funding a nonprofit. So how do you do that? And we're going to be talking about how to register a charity in Jamaica, which we learned tonight is a really valuable step for us to take. Even though we are not in Jamaica, you can still register your charity in Jamaica. So we are going to be learning how to do that so that we can maximize the work that we do.
Right. So
question here is, we'll be able to get a copy of all the slides from this presentation. I think so, yes.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yes. So I'll definitely ask presenters to send me their slides that we'll share with everyone, because they were definitely very helpful information that was provided. So thank you, Professor Hamilton. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for our first JD Watt nonprofit workshop. And we hope to see you on March 18th and April 1st. Have a good night.
All right. Good night. Thanks so much for having me. Good.